Off to another episode in this special series, Can the Records Be Trusted? With me, Dagmar Hovestädt, one of 3 female researchers behind this special series. We have 2 visitors today for a conversation. This is Amr Khito and Alan Wu. Amr and Alan both work at a project called the ISIS Prisons Museum. So we'll start with Amr. What is the ISIS Prisons Museum and how does this relate to records?
Yeah. Hey, Dagmar. Thanks for hosting us. So, ISIS Prisons Museum is a museum that shows prisons, as it says from the name, but its relation to the record because it's a whole documentation project. So, it documents the sites and the prisons and the mass grave ISIS left in Syria and Iraq after they were forced out. And then we started documenting these prisons in 3D technology and enhancing these tours. And we created tours to be able to visit these sites and to have a look on what have left in the sites. And then we enhanced these sites with evidence that we found on the site. So we found thousands of documents. We found names on the walls for prisoners. We found like the last word they left on these walls. Then we started to take photos in the beginning and try to document. Then we found that everything is changing. Then the new authority, they started to change these buildings. So we thought we could preserve them by doing this project.
So we'll unpack that a little more about the ISIS Prisons Museum now as a virtual space. It was launched very recently in October of 2024. So we'll go into that a little more, but we're 2 people today. And Alan, you are sort of taking care and servicing the back end, the technical back end. So are you the web designer, or how would you describe yourself and your relationship to the project?
Yeah, I guess I was formally trained as a graphic designer, and I come to the IPM via, I think, connections to forensic architecture as well. And I think for me, it's always been interesting about organizing like enormous quantities of material and information and finding ways to make them digestible or presentable to a public sphere to create more outreach and accessibility to this information. So yeah, it's a lot about architecture and design as well.
So that's your part in the project?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds interesting, and we'll come back to that in a little moment. So let's start to unpack it a little bit more. So Amr, you're from Syria, and the idea of documenting something that has happened is a little bit in your professional history because you started as a journalist, right? So why don't you take me a little bit into the beginning of the project when you were a journalist, and also how a Syrian journalist comes in contact with ISIS. And now this is 2017 was when ISIS was forced out. So give us a little bit of the larger framework, and then we go back to what you actually do and how this virtual museum came into being.
So exactly, we have launched this year, 15 days ago. And we had
in October of 2024. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And we had our first physical exhibition. Right now it's occurring in the headquarters of UNESCO in Paris.
Yeah, that's in November of 2024,
That's
right?
of November 2024. But I mean, we started with the Prisons Museum at the moment ISIS were forced out of the city. And at that moment, we were looking for our friends who were kidnapped while he was working on a project, Muhammad Noor al-Matar, his name. So
he was a journalist working to find out something about ISIS in Syria or
so
Iraq?
Muhammad Noor was trying to work on a documentary about ISIS and how they are working in the oil fields and trying to make profits out of that. So he was trying to document this, and at that moment he was kidnapped by ISIS. But we go back to the beginning of the Syrian revolution in Syria. At that time, we've been a group of journalists, filmmakers, and activists who started to document the revolutions in Syria in different cities. And through the work we've done, we produced a lot of TV reports, documentaries, and we've been in the field of documentation and trying to make something out of these documents that we were recording at that time. And then we've been doing this for a long time until we came to the moment that we don't have anything in front of us except for empty buildings, fragments, and little pieces as an evidence for an investigation we are working on. So Muhammad Noor al-Matar was working on an investigation as a documentary. We've been investigating what happened in Syria and who is who and where we stand from everything. And then, this is in the background of the project.
And so you started thinking that it's necessary to actually just document the buildings and that were emptied out after ISIS had used them. Why was that so important or interesting? What did you draw?
Yeah, because we have around, we have thousands of prisoners and we've been trying to trace them. But then when ISIS were forced out, we find nothing except for these empty buildings. So it was the only evidence that we could stick to. And also a part of this will to document these buildings, the technology we could use right now as 3D documenting and 360 cameras. So at that time we thought maybe it could be fair for the families of these prisoners to be able to visit these sites and to be able to look at the last traces that were left by their loved ones. And also on the other hand, we were trying to preserve that moment and to preserve this evidence as evidence on the crime that happened in Syria and Iraq.
And why prisons? Were there a particular amount of prisons or were particularly prisons of importance?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of Syria and the dictatorships, we lived, all our life has developed in buildings that could turn into buildings easily. And here I'm talking about governmental institutions, buildings and schools, for example. But then when we started to document these, the sites in Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and Al-Mosul in Syria and Iraq, we started to find that we have a pattern of usage for the architecture in Syria. So any possible building that they can seize, they can turn part of it or all of it into a prison. And this is so easy because you put 2, 3 walls, 4 walls, and you have a prison, you have a ceiling, and you have a prison. So we documented schools, we documented churches, mosques, dams, and normal houses. So we had all of these sites as an evidence in front of us, and we thought it might be an importance in our investigation.
So it sounds like if you don't pay attention too much to ISIS and how they actually enforced their rule, that prisons were a central instrument of repression and subjugation of the people that lived there.
For sure.
Because it sounds like there were an awful lot of prisons. How many prison sites have you found so far?
So far we documented more than 60, but doing this job, so it's related to a lot of aspects. So there's the families and there's the documents that we want to preserve.
You've documented hundreds of sites, though, right? So because you started in 2017.
Yeah, but what I was trying to say that we documented over 60 sites, but we are still discovering a lot of sites, and this is about the sites that were used as prisons. But then there's the mass graves, which is more complicated issue. And I think last month, for example, we got a request from the general prosecutor because right now we can present these buildings and enhanced evidence inside of them to the general prosecutors and the countries that they have started this legal procedure to prosecute ISIS members as an evidence. And so last month we received from the prosecutor a request about 3 sites that we never come across, and then it was a new point to document new sites. So
what you've accumulated since 2017 has become sort of a big archive of documentation of sites, of 360-degree videos, of documentation you actually also found that was left behind by ISIS. And then I'm asking a quick question to Ellen. So what do you do with this amount of data when the ISIS Prison Museum and Amr, the director of the museum, decided that this should be something that should go online? How do you approach a huge amount of data of documented sites of atrocities and crimes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an interesting challenge because there's so many different ways to try to interface with this material. But what I just found most impactful so far was trying to find a way for this archival team to make note of very specific pieces of evidence across these like enormous image sets, because essentially a 3D tour is like hundreds of thousands of images of a physical space, and then you multiply that across multiple sites and locations. You just have such an enormous amount of material. So what they've done is sort of gone in and manually tagged a lot of details they find within these spaces, and that enters into the archive and becomes sort of an entryway into how we can start building connections between all the documents and other various pieces of material that we've archived.
Because that makes this museum quite a special place, because it's not just going through a building in a 3D tour, but also connecting walls and spaces, floors, a hook maybe you find at the ceiling to a document or a photo or even a recollection by a witness that you can then click on and build a whole big narrative and context to that site.
Yeah, certainly. And it's definitely through the testimony and the human connection of things that I find, with the next sort of stage of this platform, which is to enable family members or people who have lost loved ones into this system to find traces and build connections, do some research that way. Like, that's a very exciting next step.
Amr, because Alan just mentioned it, the witness testimony, when did that come into play, that after you document the sites, that you wanted to hear the voices of those that were prisoners in these buildings?
Yeah, exactly. So we have these sites in 3D, and then here when we came to Alan, and we have thousands of documents, and we told him, like, we want to connect those, we want to show them online at the first site, and we were thinking of only preserving and trying to make these sites accessible for the families. And then we faced the fact that we need to do a lot of research, so we started to do research on the history of these sites, on the context of when it was started, when it was finished, how it was used. Then we needed people who were in these buildings, so we started to follow ex-prisoners and people who were able to flee this experience, and then we brought them back on site and started doing these long interviews with them and recording these testimonies to know more about the crime itself, the incidents that happened inside these sites. Then we have now the testimonies, so we have massive amount of documents, testimonies, sites, and then it was like maybe for Alan, like, to start thinking of how we add everything together and make it accessible for people, and at the same time keep the privacy of this information and not make anyone facing any put them into danger. So it was not an easy job for him, I think.
Let me ask a question about the witnesses, though. You mentioned that, and on your site you can see there's over 500 witness interviews, and those are people you can see. They're in the room, you can see their faces, and they talk in detail about what happened to them in the prison. Sometimes they're not on location, they're just sitting in a space. And they were all okay with talking about this?
In the process of recording these testimonies, I think we faced a lot of cooperation and a great will to see this online. So all the people, all the ex-prisoners that we brought into the sites, they were really involved and engaged of what we are doing, because like pieces of these interviews you can watch inside the prison. So you can watch a prisoner who is talking about the room itself. You can watch him in the room itself and about who was with him, what happened. I think it's not easy for anyone to talk about trauma incidents, but then it is at the same time, and from my experience as ex-prisoner and someone who flee Syria because of the war, that revisiting these places and the talk about this experience could be very helpful on the side of documenting.
Yeah, so it's courageous, but it also means there's a lot of trust in you and your project to give the testimony over to the site and make the world have a look at what you experienced in this building, right?
I think that trust, because like our core team in the field are are locals from Raqqa, from Mosul, from Deir ez-Zor. So I think the trust is between these people who are working on the field, and for sure the project behind them, and the people and the ex-prisoners. So I think this type of trust comes from the joint experience that both like the team and the prisoners lived, and from the need to show what happened inside these two parts of Syria and Iraq. Because like one pushing motor for us to do this project was that ISIS is not that monster that came from nowhere and swallowed our area, our culture, our society, and then it went back, it faded. So we wanted to show the details of ISIS, their control of these regions, and how they control the daily life of people, not only prisoners. So visiting this and reproducing these stories would give you this glimpse into the details of this crime.
I find that particularly impressive about the museum and the visit, that all of a sudden the ISIS rule gets a face, and it gets a face of the people that had to endure it, and their voices, I have to admit, have not been heard, right? So it connects you on a very human level to what it means to be ruled by an organization like ISIS, and the terror and the repression and the violation of rights, and how you have to figure out how to deal with that as a normal person.
Yes, for sure. I mean, we were approached, like in the exhibition right now in Paris, my colleague Amr was approached by a Spanish journalist who were kidnapped in Syria, and he was ex-prisoner in the prisons of ISIS. And he was so excited to come to the physical exhibition from Spain to Paris. I think he wrote a book. I don't have the name right now, but he wrote a book about it, and he was trying to do a documentary about his experience there. And he was saying, this is it's so exciting to me, because like I can connect with people I lived with like for quite a time. And when we started all of this, we didn't think that we were gonna meet a lot of people. So we thought of like maybe if we can get 60 witness testimony, that would be a great number for us. But then we saw, while working on these interviews, we saw that people are not excited, but they are willing to come and to talk about the experience and to look at the final product. I mean, to be able to revisit these sites and to hear other people's experiences.
And that ties in with the sort of parallel project that you have also started, and where there will be a website sometime in 2025, and that's called Jawab, right? So
exactly.
And that is about the families that have lost a person that was disappeared or maybe even killed, but it's not clear what happened to them. And so they can connect to the project in how much as you deliver the traces of people that may have disappeared or killed.
Yeah. So Jawab is a part of the project that is related to the families, as you said, and it means answer. So we started with pieces of evidence, then working with Alan on developing this website and the database, we are able now to connect more pieces into each other, and then we could some way like send answers and respond to requests from family about whereabout, when, what happened inside for our loved ones. It might be not a final answer of what happened, but like even like revealing connection between a prison and the mass grave that is related to this prison could be a lead into what happened to their loved ones at the last.
Do you have connections to family already? How many families are there that would approach you and say, is there a last trace of my brother, my father?
Yeah. So Jawab is not launched yet, but we've been doing, at the time when Muhammad Noor was filming his documentary, at that time we had this online like social media campaign that's called Jawab, and here's the name, it came from there. So Jawab started back at the time of the ISIS control on Raqqa, and it was trying to take out, to bring some footage while ISIS was in Raqqa, controlling Raqqa at that time. Then Jawab developed into a relation with not like single families, but also group of families. So We have the group of families of Al-Shaitat massacre, for example. They are around 1,100 family. So there's a lot of groups like that, and they are spread out in the entire region and around the world. So we have families in Europe, and we have families in Syria, we have families in Iraq, and these are all groups. And we've been coordinating between these families and among them. But yeah, I think we connect to a lot of families in direct relation. But I think in the future we would be able to receive requests from them and to be able to make the database and the evidence available for them based on these requests.
So Amr mentioned the database. Ellen, how do you build an archive out of all this data? The documents, the witness testimony, the imagery of the locations, and the many more information that comes in. How does that start, and is it helpful to a user?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated question, but I guess it really does boil down to exploring like what kind of path the user would take. Like, what are they coming to us for? What are they looking for? And then from there, sort of understanding like a basic taxonomy or structure for how we can start to identify like atomic pieces of data within this large set of information. And and then I guess the next step then is finding an interface or a way for people to interact with it, or at least for our researchers personally or like internally to access the data. And I think one of the biggest things we're working on right now is building sort of a graph database system as well, where we can build out connections between all these different pieces. A lot of the archive team has started building or like manually connecting things they found within the information. So from there, we can start drawing up a network of relationships and seeing how you can hop from one piece of information to another.
I guess that's the big challenge, because with digital data, it's almost limitless. Not really, but it feels like, and there's huge amounts of data. So it's like finding a needle in a haystack, right? So is there technology or software that can actually do that for you instead of manually looking and trying to draw on a board the connections?
Yeah, so I suppose, like we've been working with Weil on a tool called Linkurious, which helps us plot a lot of these connected materials. But of course, you would still need a lot of manual verification and make sure that connections are not falsely inferred or something like that. It's a starting point.
Exactly, and thanks for the technology, because before that we wouldn't be able to look into our data, even because it's a massive amount of data. So you would be able to represent maybe very small amount of it. But now with Linkurious, for example, it's the same tool that used by Panama Papers and a lot of document leaks recently. So we are able to look at the evidence and to look at the networks between these evidence, and then this would help the investigators a lot track certain patterns, and then it will also help the investigators to add evidence, to add parts of the story to the investigation itself.
So the archive is sort of closed shop, but you work with families who want access, or with researchers, or even with investigators, prosecutors that build cases. You make sure that whatever data they get is not everything, but very case specific, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because one of the challenges of accusing all this data is to make it secure and to be able to preserve it and not make any leak out of it. But then the families had the right for the data, and they go mainly they were dealing with international mechanisms. So, and at this level, you are able as a family to give them your information, but in the context of investigation, you wouldn't be able to get a lot of results. And here's where we're trying to do is we have this archive, we have these connections, and we are growing this archive daily, because we are still receiving a lot of information. As I told you, we documented more than 60 sites, but we come across sites from requests also. So exactly what we are trying to do now, we publish our investigations as deep investigations that had parts as the tours, articles, investigations, catalogs of documents and testimonies about one subject, about one topic. So, for example, the Hasba prisons in Raqqa, or the Yazidi prisons and the journey of Yazidi prisoners, women prisoners. So we close this archive and we bring all the experts to work on this evidence and then share it with the interested parties. So we have requests from prosecutors, as I said, and we respond to families, and we also respond to researchers and academics.
Thank you, Amr. Thank you, Alan. Fascinating use of the technology for a human rights cause. ISISprisons.museum, if you're interested to check it out. And, well, much success. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you.